work. Take it away.
Great, thank you. So we'll record this session, and hopefully we'll have the slides and the materials available for people later on as well. But I did want to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, which is one in the series that we've been putting on about current clinical trials in SMA. So we're going to focus on one of these particular programs today. And if we could go to the next slide, which is the main drug pipeline that we have in SMA. And hopefully a lot of people on the call here are going to be familiar with this slide. What I wanted to point out is we have our 3 approved treatments in blue at the top of this pipeline here. These are the 3 treatments that we have now approved, available. They all target the underlying genetic causes of SMA. What we've been doing in these webinars, though, is covering the programs that are just below the approved treatments, the programs that we actually have now going on in clinical trials, the various phases, phase 1, 2, and 3. And you can actually see here that we have, I think it's 7 here, 7 programs that are in clinical trials currently for SMA. Here, in particular, we're going to talk about, if you can actually see it on this slide, the 3rd one that's down in the final phase 3. We have 3 programs that are in that final clinical trial phase. We're going to talk here about the 3rd one that's on this list that actually just got added to this pipeline. It actually just came into SMA, into this final phase 3. And that's very exciting. It's actually very unusual for us in the SMA field. Usually these programs start off at very early basic research stages, and we can track them as they move from early ideas through preclinical testing and then all the phases of clinical trials. This one's actually come right in, just coming to SMA right into this final phase 3 stage. So it is new to SMA. The group, the company that's involved is also new to us, Biohaven, who's going to join us on this webinar. And what I will say, though, is, usually this process takes a long time. It can be 10 years plus for programs to move through all those stages before they get to final phase 3. Here, coming into SMA, but this is not a new program. There's a lot of work that's been done in other disease areas, and Biohaven as well is not a new company, done a lot of work. And so I hope this webinar in particular will give you some background on this program and the group, the company that's involved. Even though this is new to SMA, not a new program at all, and there's a lot of work that we can find out about why this now is interesting, why this program in particular has potential in SMA. If we go to the next slide. We are at a stage where we have approved treatments that are having a major impact on SMA, changing it significantly from what it's been in the past, the natural history of SMA, which was untreated, to now the treatments that we have available can slow progression, stop further progression, and sometimes if we can get in very early, especially with newborn screening, prevent symptoms from showing up at all. And so this is a fantastic situation for us, but we know we're not done. We have more work to do. We have more work to do to get to the point where we say we have a cure for SMA. So we have more research, more academic basic research to do, a lot more in the clinical trial area as well, and even work on making sure that we're optimizing the care that needs to go alongside the therapeutic treatments that we have as well. But what we're really focused on, I think in a lot of cases right now in the clinical trials, is looking at treatments that work in different ways than the genetic treatments that we have now. We're really focused on treatments that can have the potential to help, especially older and symptomatic patients, look to restore strength, restore functions. It's great to be able to stop where we are, but if symptoms are already there, what else can we do? What else can we actually get in place, again, with more treatments and especially care on top of those treatments, all working in combination to help reverse and restore function? So that's kind of the area that we're really focused on. And it's in particular looking at non-SMN approaches, targets, not the same ways that we've done in the past with SMN dependent approaches that look at the genetics and the proteins, different ways to attack SMA, different areas of the body that are impacted. And so if we go to the next slide. The way that we're looking at this, you can kind of break it down into looking at kind of the causes of SMA, the genetics, and this is kind of the first area that we've really been focused on with the genetic treatments that we have, SMN1, SMN2, that feed through to the protein. We've looked at that as that's critical to get sorted out first. We've got to focus on correcting the genetic issues first and foremost to be able to then have the potential later on to look at restoring strength and function. We've, I think, looked at SMA as an area where if we just focused on the symptoms first, that's not really going to help us get big gains. There might be kind of marginal improvements, incremental, things that just last for a couple of months. But for us in SMA, we had to correct the genetics first. And we've done a really good job on that with the treatments that we've got approved that focus on that area, the genetics, the causes, stopping what's going wrong first of all. Now we're coming into the area where we're saying, now we need to look at the symptoms. Now we need to look at the things that you can see that are visible, especially the muscle weakness, to address that. If we stop the genetic causes, but people were already symptomatic, people had those issues before we could stop them, what can we do to reverse some of those visible signs, the visible symptoms in other areas of the body beyond just the genetics, the protein, and the nerves? So if we go to the next slide, the way that we break this down again is the treatment approaches that we have right now that are called SMA dependent, and that's more about the protein. They all work through a little bit different kind of way with the genetics, the different genes that are involved in SMA missing in the backup gene, but they all funnel through to the SMN protein that is low, lacking in SMA, and looking at approaches to increase that protein, especially in the nerves, the motor neurons. Here, we're talking about these different ways of attacking SMA that are not about the protein, and they're called SMN independent. There's various different ones that we're looking at, some at earlier stages, looking at protecting the nerves, even regeneration of those. But the really exciting area, and the one that we're going to dig into today with a specific program, is looking at the muscles. How can we look at the muscles that are impacted in SMA? Not through the genetics. This is more about kind of a secondary effect that comes through in SMA. What can we do to improve that area? Strength, fatigue, issues like that are important in SMA that we now want to focus on addressing. If we go to the next stage, the next slide. So we're talking about new targets, different targets than we've had in the past. But one thing that's very important here is that we're looking at combinations now. This isn't an approach of a genetic treatment versus a muscle-focused, symptomatic-focused treatment. What's going to be critically important in SMA is having these work together in combination at the same time. And this is what we're now focused on, that we've got the genetic SMN-dependent treatments that are available. They focus on the cause. We're looking at clinical trials, but then hopefully approved approaches that have both of those going on at the same time. So it's adding on a symptomatic muscle treatment on top of a genetic treatment. And we need to study these in clinical trials in combination as well to be able to get the right information, data, and approvals for the ability to have these working together and have them approved together at the same time in combination. If we go to the next slide. Final slide here, just to focus on a few general items to do with clinical trials in SMA. We are very busy. It's fantastic to see that while we have approvals, we're making great progress with approved treatments and newborn screening. We have more work to do. And so it's great to see that we have all of these clinical trials going on in SMA right now. And again, working in different ways. That's a really exciting thing that we have as well. So we are paying attention, though, to making sure that we have clinical trial sites, that have the capacity and the training to carry out these clinical trials. We need to make sure that we have the right measurements in place for these clinical trials now, as well, as they are a little bit different. The clinical trials that are done in combination, and if we have older individuals that are involved, might need different measurements to see what's changing than we had in the past. They might need to be a little more sensitive. And so we're looking at that as an important area as these clinical trials are going on. We have the capacity to manage them all, and we're able to manage these new trials and measure the changes in new ways that might need to be a little bit more sensitive. Just a final item here as well is kind of a reminder that we've been putting out that while these are a little bit different, the trials, the approaches to these trials in some ways are very similar to how we in SMA have gone about these trials in the past. And it's kind of remembering that even though we have approved treatments, these trials are research. It's not about access to something that we already know works. We need the data. We've got to find out, do these approaches work? Are they safe? Are they effective? And more than anything else as well, can we get the really strong, powerful data that we need from the clinical trials to get approval from the FDA? That's always the focus here. And so even here now, even though we have approved treatments, even though these are combination trials, there's certain approaches with the criterias that are set in place for who can be in a clinical trial, sometimes needing a placebo control as well, that are all about getting that powerful data, getting the most conclusive, clear-cut data that we possibly can to be able to go to the FDA and get those approvals. That's what these clinical trials are still about, the same way that we've done them in the SMA community in the past as well. And we still need to keep that going moving forward as well. So if we go to the next slide, and I think that was my last one, I will actually hand over here to Cliff, who's going to take this on from Biohaven to go through the next set of slides. Thank you, Cliff.
Thanks, Kenneth. Really appreciate it. Excellent overview to help set up the conversation next, where we dive into one of those agents that focus on the muscle health. First of all, I really like to extend our appreciation to Cure SMA and the entire SMA community for this opportunity for us to share our program, Taldefgrobep alfa, which I'll be mentioning today, and our entire SMA program. The Biohaven team has been working with the community of patients, scientists, and treating physicians and Cure SMA to help produce a well thought out program as we go into bring this asset that's been in development for some time, but we want to bring this into SMA. For me, this is a personal journey. I've been working in the space of neuromuscular diseases for 10 years and on this particular asset. And an area that's always interested me is to bring this into SMA as the opportunity that I think to build on the great work that's been done with SMA and upregulation to do a combination therapy. We are a publicly traded company, and so because of that, I want to just be clear that information about the company is on the Securities and Exchange Commission website that talks about a lot of the risks and other aspects about our forward-looking statements. Today, I will provide the overview of Biohaven as a company. I'll provide the background on myostatin as a target, and I'll also talk about the experience we have with Taldefgrobep alfa and looking towards the potential improvement in muscle function. This will be included the preclinical data along with the human data that we've done in other disease areas. This will be followed by Lindsay, who will provide an overview of the clinical development program for SMA, and Leah will join us as we get into the questions and answer period at the end. So first of all, Biohaven is a commercial stage pharmaceutical company. We have a broad range of assets that in all stages of development, from our marketed product called Nurtec, all the way through that we've taken from discovery, carried all the way through to commercialization, along with other agents in earlier stages of development. These include 3 programs that we have in neuromuscular diseases. We have troriluzole that we are in the process of a phase 3 study for spinocerebellar ataxia. We also have verdiperstat for ALS and Taldefgrabep, what we have bringing forward into SMA. I'm very proud of the team at Biohaven and the extensive experience that we bring to drug development, and looking forward to moving forward this with what we feel to be a very scientific and family-focused program. So as Kenneth mentioned at the beginning, there have been many advances in the SMA, focusing on the regulation of SMA and upregulation. And now we're looking at other agents that would help us to improve the overall function and health of the muscle. And as we think about these continued enhancements, we have to give some background and consider myostatin. Myostatin, also known as GDF8, is a member of proteins or growth factors that are expressed by the skeletal muscle. Myostatin in particular acts as a negative regulator of muscle growth. I like to think of it as like the brakes that stop the muscles from growing too large or not proportional. We know that by blocking myostatin, we can lead to muscle changes in humans and in a number of animals. This was done in a couple species where they've knocked out the actual myostatin gene, and you see these large changes in the muscle structure and function. We see an increase in skeletal muscle mass. There's an overall body weight change in the animals as they've modified myostatin expression. We also see an improvement in bone density that's typical seen when you increase or knock down myostatin. And there's also a loss in muscle fat. Now, it's not new to be targeting myostatin. There have been a number of agents that have been in development in many different diseases of muscle wasting, and like caused by cancer or just aging, and other neuromuscular diseases. And a lot of these either parked or not moved forward for a few specific reasons. I think the execution of clinical studies has always been challenging when you're trying to identify the patient population that you think most likely will respond to the therapy. Having the endpoints that can actually measure the treatment effect, and some of them have been stopped due to safety issues. And so we've looked at this and trying to avoid, we have a very specific molecule that we feel addresses some of those other safety issues. We think that the opportunity to look at this in combination versus monotherapy is another advantage. And we hope by the great work that's been done in this field that we can get the appropriate endpoints to move it forward in SMA. Today, we're going to talk about Taldefgrobop alfa that actually is designed to specifically block myostatin activity, or stopping that negative regulation, or in essence, taking that break off of the muscle. So Taldefgrobop is an anti-myostatin nectin. What that means is that it's a fusion protein, or it's a protein reconstructed that is specific to binding a particular part of myostatin. It's been modified to improve its pharmacokinetics profile so that we know that we can administer it in a way that's as a smaller dose and yet have a less frequent administration, which I'll go into more details. It's very specific for its blockage of myostatin and does not have some of those concerns that are seen in other agents that have had safety issues. And as I said, we formulated in a way that can be administered subcutaneously by a patient or a caregiver in a home setting and not requiring travel to a center to receive the administration. The activity of Taldefgrabep is that it blocks myostatin or stops the activity of myostatin in two ways. One, it binds what they call the dimer, the two parts that come together for myostatin, and removes that from the area. But it also acts as a way of blocking signaling. It allows the complex of the Taldefgrobep and myostatin to block the receptor. And as it binds the receptor, it actually can block it from signaling. And so this dual activity of reducing overall free myostatin, but then also blocking the signaling, make it as a unique mechanism or unique agent for blocking myostatin activity. Go to the next slide, please. And so we've studied this molecule over the past 10 years in a number of different areas. One of the aspects is to study in preclinical and then followed by human, and then into disease areas. So the package of data that supports this administration was done in a number of animal model studies looking at not only safety, but also activity in models associated with Duchenne muscular dystrophy and models associated with SMA. From there, we went into doing some normal healthy volunteers or some healthy individuals that we studied the agent in, and we were able to look at the safety and look at the pharmacokinetic parameters of Taldefgrobep in that population. These studies all were very supportive of showing a dose response reduction in myostatin as we increased it and studied the administration. And I'll go into more detail of these studies in the next slide. In addition to this, we did two studies in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. In both studies, Taldefgrobep was administered to patients by caregivers in a home setting, and the duration of the study allowed for, in the second study, was up to 1 year with an open label extension beyond that for a longer period. And in the studies, Taldefgrabep was administered in combination with standard of care therapy. In Duchenne, standard of care also includes corticosteroids. I'll go to the next slide, please. So if I look at these studies that we completed, in the healthy volunteers, we looked at single and multiple doses up to 180 milligrams administered subcutaneously. This is much higher than what we're planning to use in our clinical studies. And we were shown that it was very well tolerated and safe in those programs. We were able to look at and measure that it modeled the suppression of myostatin as we expected in a dose-dependent fashion. And we were also able to observe changes in the muscle mass and lean, causing more lean muscle to be formed in those healthy individuals. Based upon that, the program was taken into two studies in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. The first study was a smaller study of about 48 boys, or 43, I'm sorry, that were administered subcutaneously in Duchenne. We used two different doses, 35 and 50 milligram. That was based on looking at their total body weight. Overall, the Taldefgrobep was very well tolerated and generally considered to be safe in the Duchenne boys. We did see dose-dependent suppressions of myostatin as we expected, and we did see some positive changes on MRI and DEXA, consistent with what we'd expect to see in the administration of an anti-myostatin inhibitor. Based upon this phase 2 study, we then launched a larger phase 3 program in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And again, administered subcutaneously in Duchenne muscular dystrophy on standard care, which included the administration of corticosteroids. In the completion of that study, it was again shown to be generally well tolerated, with site injection reactions being the most prominent side effect that were noted in the study, and it was well tolerated overall relative throughout the study. A futility analysis was completed in that to look and see, is there really a differentiation from placebo, looking at the first subset of patients that had completed 1 year of dosing. And based upon that, in the rating scale that was used, there was considered to be futile or not worth pursuing. We've licensed this product in a sense, have the data from that study, and we'll continue to dive into that to better understand what are some of the factors that may have come into play there, such as the belief from other animal studies that we think corticosteroids could have a negative impact on that. But again, that's a study in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. These studies were done as monotherapy on top of the corticosteroids, and are different from where we are in SMA, where we have combination therapy and opportunity to work in conjunction with upregulation of SMN. I'll go to the next slide, please. And just further along that line of what the rationale is. I mean, SMA to me is very exciting. I've always been excited about bringing a myostatin inhibitor in SMA, because what's important about SMA patients is the muscle's intact. You have they call an atrophy or shrinkage of the muscle, but the muscles, they're intact. That's different than what we see in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, where we actually see a loss of the muscle. And in addition with that, we now have the approval of agents that are making great strides in the improvement of neuron health and overall muscle. So the combination of looking at muscle health along with SMN upregulation provide, we feel, a great opportunity to progress this program into SMA. And this is also supported by preclinical studies. So there's been a number of publications, including our own data, where we've combined Taldefgrobop with an SMN upregulation, and we've seen the changes in increase in muscle size and function in that combination of these two agents together. And the literature supports that bringing these together, you see an improvement of lifespan in these animal models, improvement of strength, and actually improvement of overall neural function by bringing these two assets together. So based upon the fact that there's intact muscle, that we have had preclinical data to show that the combination of these agents together would be additive or better to bring them together, along with the great safety data that we've shown throughout this program. As a company, we are excited to bring Taldefgrobop into a phase 3 SMA study. And so with that, to get more detail about that study, I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay, who will cover that topic.
Great, thank you so much, Cliff. I really appreciate it. My name is Lindsay Lair. I'm a neurologist by training. I'm Vice President of Clinical Development here at Biohaven, and I'm the clinical leader on the SMA program, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today about our phase 3 Resilient trial in spinal muscular atrophy. So as most of you know, spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, is a genetic disease that affects the nerve cells, and it produces a profound muscle weakness, and atrophy, which is the shrinking or wasting that Cliff mentioned. And it really affects the skeletal or voluntary muscle activity, and so it can impair and impact walking, speaking, breathing, among other things. As Cliff mentioned, myostatin is a negative regulator of muscle growth, and blocking myostatin activity has been shown to increase muscle size and function. And Taldefgrabep alpha directly blocks myostatin activity, and as Cliff mentioned, has been well tolerated in other clinical trials. Despite the current therapies, as Kenneth mentioned, a high unmet need still exists for safe and effective treatments, because many patients still experience significant weakness and reduced levels of functioning. In combination with medications that can increase the SMN protein, Taldefgrabep alpha has the potential to further improve motor function and clinical measures. Next slide, please. So clinical trials are also called clinical studies or studies. And they're used to learn about the safety and effectiveness of potential new treatments, among other things. And they play a critical role in the development of future medical treatments. And they must conform to strict rules to protect the rights and safeties of those who volunteer to take part. For instance, with the FDA and in Europe, the EMA help to create and enforce those strict rules. Next, please. And we're introducing to you our phase 3 Resilient trial. We have a website, smatrial.com, and you can go to that and check it out. And there's a lot more information on there where you can learn more and find out about participating. Next slide. We chose to name the study Resilient because we are really in awe of the entire SMA community, the resilience, advocacy, perseverance of the patients, of the children and adults with SMA, of the family, caregivers, and the providers in this space. And penguins are one of the most resilient animals, and so Resi, as you see there, is our little mascot, and he'll be throughout our program. The purpose of the Resilience study is to learn how well the study drug, or Taldefgrabep alfa, you'll also see it sometimes as BHV 2000, to see how this study drug works and how safe it is as compared to placebo as a potential therapy to improve muscle volume and function in SMA. It's being conducted by Biohaven, Pharmaceuticals, and multiple research clinics or hospitals around the globe. Of course, using trained and qualified medical specialists. And as with any clinical trial, participation is always completely voluntary, and participants may withdraw at any time for any reason. And that is the same with Resilient. For more information, we're also listed on clinicaltrials.gov, so you can go there for more information. And that's continuously updated. Next slide, please. This is a randomized placebo-controlled study. A placebo is an inactive material. It looks like the study drug so that it's blinded. We can't tell who's on which medication, but it does not contain any active study drug. In this trial, we're randomizing 2 to 1, meaning that participants will have a 66% chance to receive the study drug Taldefgrabep alfa. We're testing the effectiveness and safety of Taldefgrabep alfa as an adjunctive treatment or an additional treatment on top of the standard of care. So the participant will already be taking a stable dose of nusinersen, risdiplam, and or have a history of onasemnogene abeparvovec. Next slide, please. We're trying to be very patient-centric or patient-focused with this trial. As Kenneth so nicely outlined, there's always inclusion and exclusion criteria when it comes to clinical studies. However, we are aiming to be as broad as possible, given the high unmet need across the population of SMA children and adults, and also the changing treatment paradigms or the treatment landscape. We know that the field has evolved with multiple disease-modifying therapies, which is really incredible and exciting, and also the widespread newborn screening. And so sometimes even within hours of birth, right, a baby can be screened, diagnosed, and even have a treatment implemented. And we know that patients are achieving milestones that they would not have otherwise achieved without those therapies. And we also know that there are combinations of therapies that will be utilized as we move into the future. So we know the field is also really shifting to focus more on the functional status of the child or adult with SMA as opposed to the SMA type, and we really want to be mindful of that as we created our study. We do plan on enrolling about 180 participants with SMA, and Resilient is not restricted or limited to patients based on ambulatory status, background therapy, or classification of SMA, and I'll get into that in just a moment. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So some of the key inclusion and exclusion criteria are that we are enrolling children and adults who are 4 to 21 years of age, who have a genetic confirmed diagnosis. We'll also be recording the SMN2 copy number. And we're including those who are ambulant or can walk, as well as those who are non-ambulant, who are unable to walk but can sit independently. And as we discussed, participants will be on a stable regimen, including the current disease-modifying therapies. Participants cannot have previously taken another anti-myostatin therapy and must weigh at least 15 kilograms. We know many participants will have the need for invasive or non-invasive ventilation, and so use at night or during the day while napping is okay, but ventilation for daytime while awake is an exclusion. We're also excluding those with a history of spinal fusion within 6 months prior to the screening, and we are excluding those with an implanted shunt or central nervous system catheter. Next slide, please. Taldefgrabep alfa or the placebo will be administered under the skin. This is called subcutaneously, and it will be given once weekly. This may be administered during a clinic visit or even at the home. So a family or caregiver, or even the patient, when appropriate, may be able to self-administer in the comfort of their own home. And the dosing is weight-based with either a 35 or 50 milligram dose, depending on the weight of the patient. Next, please. Again, we're trying to be very patient-focused here with our trial, and after the baseline visit, participants will attend visits at the clinic about every 12 weeks. The randomized double-blind, the treatment phase, is about 48 weeks, and there is an optional open-label extension, meaning that once the treatment phase is finished, a participant can opt in to an open-label extension where all of the participants will receive Taldefgrabep alfa for an additional 48 weeks. Next, please. We are going to be looking at a number of different parameters, and our primary objective is looking at a change in the function on one of the main motor scales. So a lot of you may be familiar with the 32-item motor function measure, or MFM32, and we're looking at a change in the total score on this scale between baseline and the week 48 visit. Of course, we'll also be assessing the safety and tolerability of Taldefgrabep alfa in this population. Next, please. We're really excited, if you haven't seen already, we are currently enrolling for our phase 3 trial, and this is a little excerpt from our press release, which you can also find on our website. Next, please. So if you or your child qualifies, this is what you might expect with the RESILIENT trial. All of the investigational medication, the Taldefgrabep alfa, or placebo, and all study-related care, testing, monitoring, and ongoing appointments with the study doctors and other qualified medical providers will be provided at no cost. You or your child, of course, would continue to see regular doctors for routine office visits, and if you opt in to the open label extension, that would also be at no additional cost. Next, please. There is no cost to the participant in the trial. Also, there is no cost to the insurance provider, and health insurance is not required for participation. And we also know that many of the participants will need to travel far to see their study doctor, potentially also with their family and caregiver, and there may be additional cost, and additional coverage may be available. So if you or your child meet the criteria and you're interested in our RESILIENT study, you can make a list of questions and either start by talking to your current SMA provider, or you can go to the website smatrial.com, and there's a contact me email form, and you can fill that out and be contacted by a trial site location closest to you. And if you know of others who might be interested, you can also share from the website. Taldefgrabep alfa is well positioned for development in SMA. Cliff talked a lot about how Taldefgrabep is a novel myostatin receptor antagonist that is being developed to increase muscle mass and strength. It's a novel molecule designed to lower myostatin levels as well as inhibit signaling, so it has that dual activity. And it's well characterized in numerous preclinical as well as clinical studies to date that all support the further development. We know that all of the current approved therapies target the SMN protein or increasing the SMN protein. However, SMA remains progressive and debilitating, and there's more work to be done. So treatments that specifically target muscle weakness are needed. The high unmet need, together with the available data for Taldefgrabep alpha, provides a compelling and favorable overall benefit risk profile for the continued development in SMA. I too wanted to thank the Cure SMA for the ability to participate today, as well as the entire SMA community, all the patients, the families, caregivers, as well as providers. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lindsay. We'll hand it back to you, Kenneth.
Great, yeah, thank you. And so if we go to the next slide, what we're going to turn to next is a question and answer portion. We did have questions that were submitted in advance for people that were registered. And what we did is we pulled out a few of those that we saw kind of general themes coming through. So I think we have 4 questions here that were submitted that we'll try and ask now and get some answers to. So if we go to the next slide, the first question that came in. And some of this might be repeating, but asking for a little bit more detail on some of the topics that you covered in the slides. But this first question asking, what types of SMA patients are you testing? And then also, I think this is maybe something that you didn't quite cover, but where are the clinical trials taking place?
So Lindsay, do you want to take the first part?
Absolutely, thank you, Leah. So the types of SMA patients, we are again looking for children and adults between the ages of 4 and 21, those who can walk and those who also can not walk but are able to at least sit independently would be eligible, regardless of the SMA type. So long as there's a genetic confirmation that and they meet the other inclusion and exclusion criteria, they might be eligible, as long as they also are on a background current disease modifying therapy at a stable regimen.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. And where are the clinical trials taking place? So we have about 30 sites in the United States. We have a nice range of coverage throughout the United States. The sites are opening now. As they open, they will be listed on clinicaltrials.gov, but if you don't see them there, that doesn't mean that we don't have a site in your state or a state nearby you. Just reach out to us via the website and we can let you know what your closest site is. We also are anticipating to have about 30 sites outside of the US, and that would include the UK and the EU, and we do have some nice coverage in many countries in the EU.
Great. If we go to the next slide, the next question that came in asking, will the ones receiving the placebo be offered the drug after the 1-year study concludes?
Yes, so once completing the 48-week main study, there is the option to participate in the open label extension where everybody would be eligible then to receive Taldefgrabep alpha for up to another 48 weeks.
Great, and then next slide, next question asking, did any of the initial testing of your myostatin inhibitor look at changes in bone density? And if so, what were the results? What did you see?
Yeah, sure. This was done in both in the preclinical, the animal studies that were done, and then also we used DEXA scanning in the clinical studies in Duchenne. And in the animal models, we did see improvements or increases in bone density. The human studies are done in Duchenne. We are analyzing that data now. We're looking at the studies as these are coming into our company, and we'll be sharing those results when they're available.
Great, and then the next slide, which I think is the last slide, the last question. You might have answered this, but just again, asking, what are the clinical trial opportunities for international patients?
Sure. So like I mentioned, we currently have the UK and EU countries included in the study, and those again will be on clinicaltrials.gov as they open up. We are just starting to open up those countries and sites. For patients that are not in the UK or EU or the US, that will be handled on a case-by-case basis. It will depend on multiple different avenues, whether, what language the patient speaks and what the institutional rules are if they can take a patient from another country.
Great, thank you. And just to the last slide, just wrapping up here, just wanted to say thank you to Biohaven for joining us, sharing this information, getting involved in SMA with this exciting program. So thank you for that. And also just thank you for everybody joining us on the webinar today. Again, we are recording this, so we'll get the recording done and the materials and hopefully get that available for people to watch a little later on and see this great information. So thank you again. Thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you, Cure SMA.
Thank you.
Cure SMA.
Bye.